Well, I was in Cuba several years ago, and they told me that they had taken the Arawak Indians and sold them as slaves into Africa. So there are Arawak Indians in Africa who were sent as slaves. So so they may say, oh, oh, they're from Sierra Leone, or they're from Liberia, when they were actually, native people who they sent there. My entire tribe of my ancestors from Virginia, well, the Nanzadigo, were redesignated as mulatto and sent as slaves to Antigua.
Wow.
So this is the things that they were doing. They were erasing our history.
Painted pictures of people's faces from past.
The point though that I was trying to make when you had the professor on was that I found out after all this many years of research that my indigenous ancestors were the ones that were enslaved, more so than the Africans. When Columbus came here, even in his writings, he talks about enslaving the Arawak, the Taino. He was enslaving the Native Americans. My grandfather's people, my paternal grandfather's people, were in South Carolina, and they were slaves. But when my brother took the DNA test, then it come back 100% indigenous to Colombia, South America. In other words, he didn't come from Africa. He's indigenous to the Americas. But they were telling us, or writing down, these colonial people who came here and stole the land and stole the lives of the indigenous people, also rewrote the history. And that's all that we had to go by. And very few people that I spoke to wanted to change the narrative. They wanted to live within the narrative because they don't want to upset the status quo. So they don't want to question it. But I want to honor my ancestors. And they were indigenous to the Americas. They were not African slaves. So when people, and it really bothers my spirit when I hear people say, oh, those Africans were selling each other. They were selling each other. And not, if you think about how long it took for them to come, and like the Portuguese would come, and also the Arab traders, they were set up on the shoreline, and they would be there for years. They're sitting there, and what they're doing is diplomacy with whoever's on that shoreline. They're coming as friends. They may be marrying people. They're having children, and all of us, but they know what they're there for. But the people who are in the villages don't know what they're there for, because they've never met anyone who would do the things that these people were doing. So maybe after they were there 10, 15, 20, 30 years, there was some Africans who were probably mixed with those Portuguese and those Spanish, who were, the slave traders, who would go and help, enslave, other Africans, but it would not be the Africans from their tribe. It would be this set of people here, And I don't think that it was as many as they said, because again, the Americas were full of people, and they were enslaving them. And they also were redesignating, like my ancestors were redesignated from Indian. Well, in the first place, they would the native people were going by their tribal name, and they took that from them. So you could not say that you were a member of a tribe. You were just a Indian, okay? And the fact that they called our people Indian. Columbus was going to India and got lost. So he gets lost, and then he's helped by the Arawak and the Taino, down in the Caribbean.
Yeah. And
what does he do to thank them? He enslaves them.
Yeah.
He brutalizes them. Okay, so when they renamed all of the people they met here Indian, because they were headed to India and got lost. Okay, and even India says, "Well, we're not Indians anyway. Why don't that's something Europeans. They're not even." But anyway, so they renamed all of the indigenous people to the Americas one name, Indian. So you lose your tribal name. And then they turn around and rename my ancestors. They called them mulatto. They called them colored. They called them Negro. They called them black. But nowhere in any of the records that I found did they call them African. I seldom see any records that says that these people are from Africa. Even my great-great-grandmother Leah, well, they don't say she's from Africa because it was illegal for her to be sold as an African slave. So they have her down just as black. And the inference is that she was African, So I'm skeptical about the fact that, especially in the interior, that these Africans were selling to, just rounding up their own, tribal members or other tribal members and selling them to the European. Yeah. So, so it was just the entire way that the story was told to make Europeans look like they're benign and Africans look like, oh, what terrible people they are. They sold their. What were you doing in Africa?
Well, you know what? It's an evolving story, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a story that even in my lifetime, I'm quite a bit younger than you, but even in my lifetime, I'm seeing this story continue to evolve and continue to change.
Yes.
And they're adding things to it now. And, maybe perhaps just after my lifetime, we've seen the renaming of Black Americans to African Americans,
right,
which become so you're seeing this evolving tale. We're seeing Africa now bear the brunt of the blame for slavery. That's that's the last 30 years or so. That narrative has really been driven home now.
Yes.
Where Africans are absolutely to blame for this allegedly massive export of humans from from Africa into America. So it's just one of these things where these stories just continue to be fabricated, continue to be exaggerated until it gets to a point where Europeans, white people are completely abdicated of any any wrongdoing, and we are in essence blamed for our own position in society, regardless of what the actual true origin story was.
Yes. And also, so what about the Aborigines in Australia? What about that? It's because they were there like over 50,000 years. And they are, they were subjected to colonization too. So what did they do to deserve those people going over there colonizing their lands? We
don't talk about that.
Yes. Yes. What did they do?
It's really funny, actually. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I recently finished. I did a bit of a documentary on the abolition of slavery, and this is something that in England, obviously, I'm from London, and in England, it's a big deal or they're making a big deal about the fact that England abolished the slave trade. So everyone from around the world needs to praise the British Empire because they were the ones who stood up and ended this horrendous act of slavery for the world. They made it illegal across the world. So I've done a documentary and I've already exposed all of the financial impetus and all of the spin behind it. But here's the most interesting thing I wanted to raise there. 1833 is when England abolished the slave trade. 1834, they committed one of the most worst genocides in history in Australia. Yes. So they want to be praised on this hand for this, but then a year later, they are massacring people, innocent black people, en masse, without any motive. And they want us to believe they did this thing this was for good. This is because we had morals, but we don't talk about this where we massacred a year later, massacred an entire population of people. Yes. So I'm glad you mentioned that because it's like went
to Hawaii and did the same thing. Went over there and colonized Hawaii. You know, everywhere they went, they have set up their little colonies. They cannot, for some reason, live with indigenous people. They think, well, I don't know what they're thinking, but it appears to me that you think you're entitled to land, and nobody else is entitled to live in peace. But your peace comes at the expense of war and killing us, and that is, that's unacceptable. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that, myself, one of my ancestors who was in Virginia, he came from England, and I believe he was a Moor, but he was indentured to this man in England, and the man sent a letter with him. And, when he came, his name was Amnadab Booker, and he came to Virginia as an indentured servant. But the letter said he is not African. He is a trusted servant. He is a free man, and he sent that letter with him to America when he went to, he came to Virginia, and he's one of my ancestors, and he's a dark man, but he's not, they said he's not African. So what was he, and he's dark,
he's a black man.
He's a black man.
He's a black man. It's a whole, once again, it's a whole, because I literally was talking about this on my other channel the other day as well. We were, I don't know if you know about the recent genetic discovery they found in the UK. So they found specimens in two locations. This is much more recent, but Cheddar Man's very relevant. I'm glad you raised that because it's very relevant. Well, this is much more recent. They found two people. One of them they called Up Down Girl, and the other one was another one. So they found these two specimens in different. They both date to around 700 AD, and they found them in two separate places, and they both have 20 to 40% recent West African ancestry. So now, I don't even think that's that relevant because you mentioned Cheddar Man already, and every time archaeologists, and this is the thing, they're not telling people this, but most of the time when archaeologists are digging up bones in the UK, they tend to be digging up people who are phenotypically, physically, or anthropometrically black people. So I got a whole line of research understanding that England's past, there are researchers like Dave McRitchie and Gerald Massey and lots of other researchers who have plainly spoken about the fact that the indigenous people of the UK were black. and they persisted up until very recent times. In fact, they were the nobility for a long time as well.
Yes.
But that's a whole nother conversation. But the point being, I am not surprised at all that your ancestor from the UK you've discovered was a dark or swarthy. They might have called it swarthy or dark or black even. They might sometimes use the word black. I'm not surprised in the slightest, because there's a large wave of people who came from Europe into America who were also black. And I think I want to lead that into a question for you, actually, because one of the things I really like about your research, and it's what makes it very novel, and it makes it very valuable, and it makes it very rare, is I feel like you understand the nuance of the multi origins of black people in America.
Yes.
Because a lot of people are so they hear one thing and they're so kind of dogmatic about that they say everything else is a lie. So you got the people who are like, we all from slavery and there were no black people in America. All black ancestry comes from Africa. And then you got people who will say, we all come from America and we have no African blood. We're not Africans. We are natives. And then you got people who say, no, we're all Moors. We all came from Europe. We don't have any native ancestry and we don't have any African ancestry. And I feel like, because what makes your research and your work so much more powerful is you've just proven through genealogy. And look, I've had discussions with my ancestors. I do have a bit of African in me. That's not a complete myth. There's definitely some African that came, but I also have a whole bunch of native ancestry. And hey, I've also found one or a couple of ancestors who probably came from Europe. Yes. And I feel like that's just the story, or a version of the story, that people need to hear, so they're not threatened by the fact that this is much more complex than just saying we are from one place.
Right.
You know, do you feel like that's, I mean, how do you feel about, do you feel like that's something that you've picked up and you wanted to add to this discussion?
Yes, because the DNA test I first took was family tree DNA. That was like in 2003. And I thought it would be more native on my mother's side, but it came back like 87% European on my mother's side, 8% native, and then 5% African. And it was T2B4 or something like that. But they and they called it the 7 daughters of Eve that came out of East Africa. So this was in 2003, but they went after family tree DNA so hard that you very seldom, unless you look, go back in the records, you're not going to see them say that much anymore.
Wow.
They do not want them. They meaning, I think it's the theological people, the church people, the Christians that already want to say that nothing existed before Christ or whatever, whatever their origin story is. It has nothing to do with the timeline that we look at. And so I would say maybe it's a scientific, timeline. So then the Christians will say, oh, the science is flawed. But so this was like 20,000 or so years ago that my ancestor, who was a female, left Africa, went over the Iberian Peninsula into what is now Spain. And they stayed there. They didn't go back to Africa. So I'm thinking, okay, they were there. And if they went over that Iberian Peninsula, there were other Africans going. It's like a highway, even today, the Iberian Peninsula that goes from Africa into Europe. And so these people, from the DNA, they show you a DNA path. They were there. They were in. So they were there before there was a Europe. they went to a landmass that was not what it is today. And they are the original people of Britain.
Mm.
They were in Italy. They were in France.
Mm.
This DNA traversed all of what is now Europe. And I connected to one of my DNA cousins who's in Belarusia. And so I was saying, well, how do you, because we were talking about, how did our ancestors, why did our ancestors leave, Spain? And she said, well, we believe that they were run out during the Inquisition. So that would have been when the Moors were there. So we know that there were still people coming constantly over the Iberian Peninsula into what is now Europe. And we became the modern humans, or the so-called Europeans, and somebody mixed with that Neanderthal. And so the Neanderthal gene continues to exist. And then I'm just saying what I'm learning from their scientists, but they don't want you to say they got a Neanderthal gene, or they want that Neanderthal gene to be some kind of superior being.
Yeah. We've all heard that. Now Neanderthals created art, and they're talking about everything. Neanderthals were, and this is just a cope, I like to call it, because they realize that most native melanated people don't carry the Neanderthal ancestry,
right? And
so I find it incredibly. It has to be superior, because if we have it at up to 4%, and those inferior Africans don't have any of it, it must be
right.
a contributor to what makes us superior. It's actually interesting. There are some scientists out there who believe that Europeans could be Neanderthals who have experienced several waves of African introgression. So there's the other line of thought where they say, actually, what's happened is the Neanderthal genes have, because they were inferior to the Homo sapien genes, we're only showing 4%, but we could be as much as 20-25%. But because the Neanderthal genes are inferior, the Homo sapien genes are selected above them. So that's why. So although we're only showing 4%, we could be showing much more. So these, like you were saying, there's so much. I think when it comes to genetics, and I'm not a big fan of genetics, although I think they can tell a story. Yes. I much prefer what you do in terms of genealogy, because a lot of people don't realize how much genetics are influenced by the tales of anthropology. And when I say tales, I mean Eurocentric version of history. They'll get genetics and they'll make them fit. And this is one of the reasons why, I say this a lot to people, one of the reasons why Black Americans pull up so much West African ancestry, right, is because so much problematic or unresolved DNA amongst Black Americans has been classified as African purely on the basis of the narrative.
That's right.
So they're like, okay, we don't know how to classify this. We know that this bunch of Black Americans are all carrying these SNPs or these traits. Right. They all came from here, didn't they? During the slave trade. Yeah. They all came from. Okay, therefore, it's a Nigerian trait. We'll just call it Nigerian. Meanwhile, it's not something that is maybe present or even common in Nigeria, but they'll classify it as that based on the narrative they've been given. Right. So that's why.
How many Nigerians even do DNA? You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Like, I met a brother who was from Senegal, and I was doing, telling him about my DNA test and all, looking for my ancestors. And he was like, I mean, he knows who his ancestors are. Yeah. He doesn't have to do DNA. We're the ones that are looking for what was taken from us. And he was like, oh, that's interesting. But it was, so, and they will say that, okay, like ancestry, it is what you just said. It's they're looking at trace. They're not looking at who took the test and who we're really blood related to. because the Europeans that are my cousins that I see on Ancestry, I can actually, talk to them. Some of them communicate with me, but I have yet to be able to communicate with a Nigerian DNA cousin on Ancestry because they're not there. They don't have a large pool of them. They have a large pool of Europeans. They don't have a large pool of Native Americans, for that matter. So it's more like it's a theory. They're doing some theoretical stuff. On Family Tree DNA, I am able to communicate with those who took the DNA test. So in other words, we can email back and forth, but not so much on Ancestry. And Ancestry is autosomal, which is like going back maybe 1,000 years. Yeah. But Family Tree DNA goes all the way back to Africa, all the way back to East Africa, thousands and thousands of years. So there's a difference between, some of the tests, that are more, Ancestry to me is more commercial than Family Tree DNA. And that's more informational for me. It was more helpful for me than Ancestry.
I find the whole discussion, like I said, on genetics, it's a very young field, first of all. Like I always, geneticists have told me that. And they said, you can't make too many claims about what Ancestry can tell you. Because you've actually got these 3 types of ancestry, which is Y-DNA, mitochondrial DNA, and autosomal, like you mentioned. And they're useful for different things. Mitochondrial will tell you about the women in your family. Y-DNA will tell you about, I say women, a single line of women through your mother to a mother's mother and so on. Y-DNA will do the opposite and do that with men through your father, so your father's father, single ancestor once again. And then autosomal gives you a much broader span, but then can only really tell you who you're related to at the moment. It can't tell you who you're related to historically because of recombination, which basically scrambles. Every time your parents get together in your ancestry, it scrambles the autosomal DNA. So it doesn't go back very far, like you went very well articulated. So it can only tell you who you're related to at the moment. But the thing about it is, who you're related to at the moment, you can be related to them for a plethora of reasons.
Right.
You've only been given one reason, slavery. They see all these people. Now, if you read like you said, you've read the notes of Columbus. Columbus is very open about the fact that Africans were trading with Americans. Yeah. And he even found the African alloy. Anyone who was there before the Europeans arrived has to be regarded as indigenous. Even if they came 100, 200 years before, they have to be regarded as indigenous. That's how we're classifying it in America, people who were there before they got there. So we know Africans were there because of Columbus. We know that Sundiata is said to, the Malian is said to have ended up in the Americas. We have plants and shared produce, tomatoes and potatoes, for instance, that are very endemically woven in, cassava as well, woven into, and corn, woven into West Africa's cuisine, not post-colonially, woven into, as in old into West Africa's cuisine. And these are American produce. Right. So we have all of the hallmarks and the suggestions. There's even the aspect of the monkey that's in America that came from Africa, and the only way it could have got there is if it was brought over. So we have all of these reasons why modern Americans could carry similar DNA to West Africans, and it's disregarded for a single storyline that the Europeans have fed us.
Yeah.
And I just think that's very important that when people get their kind of genealogy, or so not genealogy, when they get their genetics results and their DNA, that they understand it's not giving you the storyline, it's giving you a storyline, it's a Eurocentric one. So you have to be able to do the work that you're doing, because that might give you some more insight as to why it looks the way it does. So if you're having West African ancestry might not negate the verbal or the oral history that's been passed down that says, no, we have native ancestry there. Why is it pulling up? Why is it pulling up African ancestry on your father's side if we were native? Well, that might be a reason why, you know.
Yeah.
So it's just very.
Because I was in Cuba several years ago, and they told me that they had taken the Arawak Indians and sold them as slaves into Africa. So there are Arawak Indians in Africa who were sent as slaves. So so they may say, they're from Sierra Leone, or they're from Liberia, when they were actually native people who they sent there. My entire tribe of my ancestors from Virginia, the Nanzadigo, were redesignated as mulatto and sent as slaves to Antigua.
Wow.
So these are the things that they were doing. They were erasing our history. And my search when I started was years ago. There wasn't a lot of there wasn't no internet. There wasn't nothing easy about it. I had to write letters and travel and talk to people face to face and go into archives to find my ancestors. And I always feel like my ancestors were guiding me, that they were telling me, go here, look there. And, and I'm like, oh, wow, I'm in this dirty basement with all these dusty books and for the colonial period, I'm opening them up and I'm seeing who my ancestors were. I'm seeing them being redesignated from who they were as a tribal member to Indian, and then to mulatto. Oh, and there were a lot of mulattoes because the Europeans, who were mostly males at first, were committing sex crimes against the native and indigenous people. The same things they did in Africa. Wherever they were going, they were leaving babies, and then they want to, look at us like, you just want to be I don't want to be you. Y'all people wanted to be us. That's Absolutely. Why you were out there messing with our ancestors. You all are okay. They're the minority in the world. I'm sorry. It ain't my, I didn't cause it. Why do these folks, not all of them, hate us? We did not make them the minority, and like 9% of the world and created 90% of the wars and stuff that destroying the earth that we all have to live on. Why are you doing that? And it's like we are, they're like, some of them are like petulant little children, and we're like the parents saying, okay, now, just go over there and sit in the corner and think about what you did, And so we're
not nuke, please.
Yeah.
Let's cool off.
Some of the thing, it's just like you got all this power, you got the money, that's what you wanted, and you're still creating havoc.
Absolutely.
What do you people want?
With no deliverance, just seeking experience in a better place than painted pictures of people's faces from past. Hated figures never keep hating they heart. Raise a trigger and